we are going to use this trend line amidst this data. Here's our trend line. Here's the information about our trend line. And we're going to use this to talk about the model in multiple ways. So we're going to answer these questions, and for most of them we're going to be back on that other page. But we're going to talk about the dependent variable, the independent variable, the y-intercept, and the slope of the trend line. So let's just start with these four. So when you're looking at the graphic, the dependent variable, remember the dependent is generally our y variable. Our y is on the vertical axis. So the dependent variable will be the number of texts. So dependent. And that makes sense because the number of texts depends on the year. So the year is the independent variable. And I would say generally if you're talking about any kind of time period, whether it's years, months, weeks, something like that, those time periods are generally the independent. So the dependent variable will be on the vertical axis, the y-axis, and the x-axis is the independent variable. So the next one talked about the y-intercept. Well, we see the y-intercept here at negative 5.3114. So the y-intercept means when I have an x value of 0, that's the value of the y. So if we kind of think about, this is the beginning of our graph, right? But if we would extend this a little bit, you can see that here, where x is 0, our graph is right around negative 5. So the y-intercept is where our graph crosses the y-axis when x equals 0. Okay. The slope of the trend line is 2.218. Now, if we're talking about 2.218 over 1, right? Slope is generally a fraction. Now, slope is also the change in the y values over the change in the x values. So you have y's on the top and x's on the bottom. Remember, our y values represent the number of texts. And the denominator talks about the years. Now, our slope is positive. That means the number of texts, oops, that's an x, texts increase because it's positive, 2.218, and I believe our data here is in millions, so we can let's go ahead, increase 2.218 million for each year, because on the bottom it's just 1 year. So the slope talks about the number of texts increase 2.218 million for each year. All right, now let's go to the bottom, the scope of the model, and then the trend line of being above and below. So when I look at this, the scope of our model is generally what's given, right, what we're talking about. So in this case, our scope really does kind of go just from 05 to 15, because that is generally what we can deal with. Sometimes you can go maybe one or two either directions, but generally the scope is what's given in the graphical area. Now, the trend, you can see by the graph, I'm going to highlight this in pink, where my trend line is below my actual data. So in these two sections, the trend line is the estimate, and the estimate is lower than the actual in those areas. But if we go here to more of a red, in this in-between area, the trend line is above the actual data. So you will generally, when you deal with trend lines, have kind of it won't be even because it just doesn't work that way, but it's kind of a split. Some of your values your estimates, the trend line estimates, will be above the actual data as they are in the middle here, and sometimes that trend line estimation will be below the actual data as they are in the outside pink spots.